Welcome back for part 2 of our Desert Road landscape project. So we're going to talk about colors now. So I can see there are some really obvious color choices here in my example. I see a lot of kind of reds and oranges and browns back here, blue for the sky, black or gray for the road, yellow for the lines on the road, maybe some tan over here on the side of the road. So I'm looking at for the most obvious colors that I could use. So I'm going to pull out brown and blue, yellow, and I can mix yellow and brown to get a kind of tannish color. I don't see a lot of green because this is the desert, so a lot of things that live in the desert, plants, are usually not very green, although I do see maybe a couple. So maybe I'll use some dark green, but not a lot. I'm going to pull out black for the road and the mountains, and maybe a little bit of orange. So these look pretty good. This looks like a pretty good match for the color palette that I'm going to use over here. So I'm going to get these out of the way and get started on my coloring. So I'm going to start with the lines on the road. Very simple. And remember, these are the paint pencils. So for those of you who are at home, you want to look for the paintbrush and the words watercolor to make sure that you're using the correct pencils, because later we're going to paint this. Okay, so what I'm doing here is kind of adding a shadow along the edges of the mountain to kind of make it look more like it's overlapping with the other mountains. It's hard to see on my photograph that I was using, but there are some areas that are like a lighter gray, and then there's some areas that are a darker gray. And because I don't have a gray paint pencil, I'm going to try to mimic that shade of gray by using a light pressure with my black and then pressing harder with the black to get a darker shade. So I'm using kind of lighter pressure here for the mountain, and then along the edge I'm pressing a lot harder. So that's just a trick that I'm just trying out to see how it looks, how it's going to look, how it's going to work. So I think what I'm going to do is do that for along the edges of my mountains. And then I think I'm also, in addition to using like light gray or like a light black, I'm going to mix in a little bit of brown there too. Can't really see the brown on the mountains, but like I said, this is not going to look exactly like the photograph because this was done with a camera and I'm not a camera, obviously. So I'm going to take make some artistic choices here and create this in my own way, in my own style. All right, I'm just about done with the ground, but I changed my mind. I think instead of using the paint pencils for the kind of plants and the shrubs and things that are growing along the side of the road, I'm going to use a crayon instead, because I know that when I paint this later on, if I use a paint pencil and I put a wet brush over it, it's gonna kind of spread out and might not look so much like a plant anymore. It's going to look kind of like a brown blob. So I'm going to use a crayon instead, because I know that if I use paint over top of a crayon, the crayon is not going to move because the crayon resists the watercolor and the paint. So I'm going to add some shrubs here along the side of the road using brown. And keep in mind that as you add your plants on the side of the road here, they need to follow along with the receding lines. So the plants over here on the side that are closest to the foreground or the front are going to be bigger, and then as they get back into space, they're going to be much smaller and smaller and smaller. So keep that in mind if you decide to add any shrubs, things like that, onto yours. I'm gonna make them smaller as they go back into space. Now I'm going to finish up my sky, and then I'll be back here for part 3, which is the painting part, next class. I'll see you then.